as well. So with that said, it doesn't seem like there are any questions. So I'm going to move off of the fasting part and move right into hijacking Bitcoin. And before I do this, I actually want to say what the purpose of this is. And so, the purpose of this is not to, even relitigate the past. And I will say, I was going to put together a diagram for this, but I ran out of time. The target audience here isn't to re-engage with Bitcoin maxis. Bitcoin maxis are, in my opinion, an absolute lost cause. And when I say Bitcoin maxis, I'll actually further define it. People that have been Bitcoin maxis since before the actual chain split, before you had Bitcoin Cash and some of the others. So before 2017. So the people that were Bitcoin maxis before that, but were aware of what went on in that process, that are still Bitcoin maxis, those people are in general a lost cause, because they've essentially sold out their own philosophy and their own ideology for their gains in fiat. And so I've had countless interactions with these people, and their general mindset is they'll rationalize anything. I mean, they'll support BlackRock, they'll support civil asset forfeiture, they will support soft war and people from the military talking about how to use, Bitcoin mining as a strategic part of the defense strategy. Like, it's just, what it will take for them to admit to themselves that they've basically caved on their principles, it's really almost impossible to get someone to do that. And so it's not a good use of time. But what's important about this are actually the new people that are being introduced to Bitcoin that have never heard of this. And by the way, this is like 99.999% of the people have never heard of the Blocksize wars. They've never heard of hijacking Bitcoin. They've never heard of the fact that people actually used to use Bitcoin to buy things and to sell things and that is most people. And I say this with some experience because I have traveled all over the country and I've done workshops on CBDCs, and the people that come to these workshops, they're not crypto people, but they're people that have woken up recently. And generally they're people that, weren't talking about or thinking about the Federal Reserve or ending the Fed 7 years ago, but because of COVID now, it's a big issue for them. And so these are people that are motivated, these are people that are interested, these are people that are engaged, and almost none of them have heard about hijacking Bitcoin, and none of them were aware that you could use Bitcoin. The general understanding is that Bitcoin is just a speculative investment, or maybe digital gold. And actually, most people have a pretty negative opinion of it that I've met with. And so even in that regard, but as I like to say, when I would survey people, more people in the outside world have heard of Sam Bankman-Fried than Satoshi Nakamoto. So I think the point here is it's not to be combative or even to pick a fight with the maxis. It's to actually think about how to start laying out some of the information in this book, because I've had other situations. I was at Chris Martens's event for Peak Prosperity, and I got more comments from my section of the talk about hijacking Bitcoin than everything else. I had people come up to me and say, wait a minute, Michael Saylor did what? He said what? You should only use Bitcoin for store of value. It shouldn't compete with the dollar. I mean, people just have not been presented not only with the information in hijacking Bitcoin, they haven't actually seen all of the stuff that Michael Saylor has been saying in kind of a condensed clip out of his own mouth. And so people are really surprised by this. And I think a lot of people that have gotten into Bitcoin it's kind of FOMO, but they don't understand what it is. So they're just kind of like, FOMOing into it, but without any understanding. And so once they get the understanding, once they understand what they're FOMOing into, it does change their perception. And I will tell you, I have changed a lot of people's minds, or I wouldn't even say change their minds. I've educated them on something that they were just loosely familiar with, but may have even been invested. And it was a big shift for them, a complete shift for them. So it is important to get this information out there. And so for those watching, if you're new to Bitcoin, you need to understand that there's a Bitcoin white paper that was written by the creator, Satoshi Nakamoto, that outlined how the whole thing was supposed to work. And in the very beginning, the very title of it is a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. So there's no store of value language in here. And so the abstract says, a purely peer-to-peer version of electronic cash would allow online payments to be sent directly from one party to another without going through a financial institution. So that is everything that you need to know. So this isn't about BlackRock working with BlackRock. This isn't about big financial institutions working with each other. This isn't about a store of value. This isn't about any of these other things. It was launched right after the 2008 financial collapse, with kind of the understanding that the banking system was, fragile at best and corrupt for sure. And so what you see with Michael Saylor and everything else is just a complete perversion. So I'm going to play that clip again because I had it at the intro, but maybe everyone wasn't here. So I'm going to play this because you could just watch this clip and it'll sum up everything that you need to know about this debate.
Talk about it while sitting down. So anybody here that's sick of the government inflating the money supply to pay to kill people all around the world? Stop using their money. Use Bitcoin. The answer is here. We can put a stop to all of that. You don't have to support them in any way. Start using Bitcoin. There are so many websites that accept Bitcoin now. More and more are coming online every day. If you have business, you need to start accepting Bitcoin. What Bitcoin allows every single person in this room and on the planet who has access to the internet, you can have your own private bank account, right? It's called a Bitcoin account, and it's impossible for the government to seize your account. It's mathematically impossible for anyone to block you from sending or receiving money with anyone else anywhere in the world. And if you're careful about how you use it, it can be done anonymously as well. This totally strips government's control over the money supply away. There's nothing they can do about it. There's no way they can stop it. The only way they could stop it would be to shut down the entire internet in the entire world. And that's not going to happen. This is what every libertarian's absolute dream come true. It's here, and it's called Bitcoin, and we need to spread the word to everybody about it. And I'm glad you guys are here, and we're here to answer your questions about it. And when you're done learning about it here today, tell your friends, tell your family, help them set up Bitcoin wallets, tell everybody that you know about Bitcoin. Anytime you need to buy something, ask the merchant if they'll allow you to pay in Bitcoin. And anytime you receive US dollars, convert them to Bitcoins, then use them as Bitcoins. We need to spread this, and the world is going to be a much, much, much better place because of it. And it's not a question of if this is going to happen. It's just a question of how soon it's going to happen. And with your help, we can make it happen sooner rather than later.
But at the end of the day, I think there'll be know your customer this, there'll be anti-money laundering that, there'll be some tax regulations, there'll be some back and forth over what you can do, there'll be concerns about privacy. That's why I look at Bitcoin and I think it's pretty clear. If the use case is store of value, well, like 7.8 billion people on Earth need a store of value, and probably the value of that is 100 to 300 trillion dollars, right? That's enough. That's good. If the use case is currency, replace the dollar and the euro, that seems like that's just intentionally inflammatory. We don't need to replace the euro and the dollar. The bankers are going to be upset about replacing the euro and the dollar. I don't think it's going to happen, and not in the next decade or 2 decades, so we don't need to get wrapped around the axle on that. And if the use case is medium of exchange and payment, like we don't really need to pay for a pizza with it. We don't need to pay for a Starbucks coffee with it. I mean, that's already solved by Alibaba and PayPal and Square and Apple Pay and Amazon and Google Pay, and it's, they can be regulated, and Visa and MasterCard. So you can leave Visa and MasterCard alone. You can leave the dollar and the euro alone. We can agree to pay taxes. We can, we cannot.
So again, that actually highlights everything you need to know about where it was, and then what the white paper says, and then what Michael Saylor is saying now. And so the challenge here is that most people have never seen Roger's version of this. Most of these new people have never read the white paper. A lot of these people don't know what a white paper is, have never heard that this document exists, let alone they haven't read it. And it's almost like you can actually see there are people that are largely like there's a class of 2017 Bitcoin. You get a new influx of people into Bitcoin when there's a bull run. So you've got the class of 2017 and you've got the class of 2021, and they almost have they do have definable features. There are specific things that they believe based on the indoctrination in the information that they were exposed to at various points in time. And so, earlier, if you're talking about the people that were involved during the original, fork wars and things that we're going to talk about, I mean, a lot of them had read the Bitcoin Standard and so forth. And now there's, and that's still a part of the ongoing false narrative and propaganda. But then now people aren't even reading that. Now people are just at the point where it's like, oh, I saw the Bitcoin conference, or I saw a politician talking about this. I saw Cynthia Loomis. And so we're further removed from people actually having any information at all. I mean, we're like way down in Plato's cave at this point with all of it. And so it's a challenge as much as anything else. So I'm going to present some of the high level information from just part one of the book. But again, to me, the challenge is more not to pick a fight with the maxis, but how do we make people aware of some of these just basic points? Here's an example from the book. This was an early meme or ad for Bitcoin. I mean, this was what it was all about at the time. This was even, I believe, on the website for Bitcoin. And it was comparing Bitcoin to Western Union. You could send up to $50 using Western Union for a $5 fee, and it was only 1 cent to do this anywhere in the world with Bitcoin. And you didn't have to go to a Western Union branch or anything like that. This is what people were excited about. This is what it was about at the beginning of Bitcoin. I guarantee you the class of 2017, people involved in Bitcoin now, or the class of 2021 have never seen this before. They've never even heard of this. This is a foreign concept to them entirely. The other thing that's really eye-opening is how much of a squandered opportunity it was. I mean, to the point that how heavily, the ramp up was with Bitcoin. By the end of 2017, these are just some of the large merchants that were taking Bitcoin directly. Overstock.com, Microsoft, Newegg, Expedia. There were some Subway sandwich franchises that were taking Bitcoin, Steam. And so people were really using this for commerce. And it was a really exciting time because, the price started to jump in 2017 because people were actually using it. And then people started buying it because they were seeing that people were using it. And then it got hobbled. It got basically neutered. And so the fees went from, in the Western Union example, 1 cent, to now the fees jumped to an average of like $28, and really even closer to $50. So you had these big merchants that were selling things for Bitcoin and the fees were $50. And if you were trying to, pay at the basic level, lowest tier for speed, it would take 7 to 14 days to complete a transaction. So of course, Bitcoin shifted from being a medium of exchange to a store of value because it didn't work. It broke. They broke it, and it wasn't intended to be this way. It wasn't designed to be hobbled like this. And I'll walk through this. But I think this is a really important slide because more than anything else, when I talk to people that are new to this whole concept, they didn't know any of this. They would be stunned to learn that these big retailers were taking Bitcoin. And so this is from the book. There's kind of a great section in there that compares the original design of Bitcoin versus the hijacked version. So what was the purpose, the core principle? The purpose of the original design was digital cash for internet payments, for online payments, right in the abstract, right at the very beginning of the white paper. What's the hijacked version? Store of value, even without functioning as money. Again, the Michael Saylor comment is the dominant view. And you even now have politicians and the Federal Reserve and everybody else coming out and saying, oh, well, maybe Bitcoin is digital gold. And by the way, that's not a win. It's not a win when politicians are saying this. It's not a win when the Federal Reserve says this. They're not conceding a loss. They're actually cheering on a psyop. That's effectively what's going on, to the point where even today, I mean, Jack Dorsey, who is no advocate for freedom, I would argue, even he came out today and said, effectively Bitcoin is useless unless it is ultimately used for payments. Now, I suspect he has his own motivation around the things that he's doing around payments, but nevertheless, for once, I actually agree with him. And this is clear in terms of what's going on with the original version versus the hijack. Transaction fees, extremely low by design. Satoshi early on said in the discussion forums and in other places that Bitcoin was supposed to compete with MasterCard and Visa. It was supposed to be able to do 25,000 transactions, per second. Like even back in the day, like as it was originally designed, it wasn't, oh, we're going to build this out now, and then 20 years from now, it's going to be able to compete with Visa and MasterCard. The point was to be able to do that quickly out of the gates. Scalability, the idea was it would scale with block size increases, which, in a way that isn't even right, because the original Bitcoin had no block size limit at all. And the block size is just, how many transactions can you put into a block? So Bitcoins are mined every 10 minutes. Every 10 minutes, somebody solves a math puzzle, and then whoever wins solving that math puzzle adds a new block of transactions. And so it's a blockchain. Every 10 minutes, new transactions are added, but you can't go back and delete the other transactions. But if you limit the size of the block to, say, 1 megabyte, then that means you can only do 7 transactions per second. Well, that was never supposed to be a limit. There was no block size. And it was only put in as a temporary measure as they were kind of testing the network. And so it was never intended to be capped. It was intended to scale as the block size increases. You weren't going to get to Visa and MasterCard levels by keeping the block size small and then having the transaction fees go up to $50, because you're not going to be able to compete with MasterCard or Visa or Western Union, because you still have to compete in the marketplace. Offering a digital currency that's 50 times as expensive as Western Union is not an innovation. That's not actually what people were looking for, and that wasn't the intent. Node expectations. The original idea behind this is a node was going to be a computer or a group of computers that actually mined a block, that actually were putting computational power behind solving these math problems. And that over time, that competition was going to get fierce and fierce. And there were going to be companies investing hundreds of millions of dollars competing against one another to build data centers. And those were going to be the nodes that basically handled the transaction information regarding the blocks every 10 minutes. This hijacked version has this kind of almost like communist, okay, well, we need to make it so that anybody with a $100 or $50 Raspberry Pi can be a node. And that makes no sense. Those nodes don't really even do anything, but on top of that, it just hobbles the entire network and makes the entire system unworkable. And then there's the economic design. So the economic design for Bitcoin was this: you have these block rewards every 10 minutes. When a miner solves one of these problems, when you go back to when this was launched, a miner would get 50 Bitcoin every 10 minutes for solving that, being the first to solve that math puzzle, plus whatever the transaction fees were. Well, since the network was new and no one was using it, and since it would take time to build out the network, it was very important to have these high reward amounts. But those reward amounts get cut in half every 4 years. So it goes from 50 to 25 to 12 and a half, et cetera. And so the whole point of that was, the whole point of the block reward was to be a subsidy to incentivize people to mine and to begin mining until such time as there were huge transaction fees coming from large volumes of transactions. So small transaction fees, but high volume. And that's fundamental to the entire economic system. The hijacked version claimed that this model was flawed and then changed it to this, basically it's like a cap and trade system for carbon. So we're going to artificially limit the size of the blocks, and then we're going to put in place this auction mechanism for people to be able to bid up how much they pay for transactions. Well, once again, you have to compete with gold and MasterCard and everything else. Like, this idea that people are just going to continue to pay more and more per transaction doesn't work with basic economics. And it's going to turn into a real problem, probably at the next halving, because as of today, and I talked about this briefly yesterday, the Bitcoin blocks are almost empty. Nobody's doing transactions on Bitcoin. And so what that means is, unless people keep on buying speculatively, there will not be, the transaction fee today was 11 cents. Well, if you're doing 7 transactions per second and you're a miner, so 7 transactions per second times 11 cents for the transaction, that's not going to be enough for people to make money off of all of the hardware and computational power and everything that they have going into mining this. And so So that is actually a fatal problem for Bitcoin that will be coming up with the next halving. So this whole debate over store of value or medium of exchange, I mean, you will have, people, you have Saifuddin Amos, who's like the guy, he's the Bitcoin standard guy. And so he's out there putting these statements out, like the real advantage of Bitcoin lies in being a reliable long-term store of value, not from its ability to offer ubiquitous or cheap transactions. Well, again, that's not in the white paper, and we really needed an alternative payment system. And now it's absolutely essential that we have an alternative payment system. Think about what's going on now with all of the debanking, with all of the financial surveillance that we already have with the existing dollar. This isn't some thing that we have to worry about in the future. The FBI is already using AI to analyze our financial transactions. The NSA is already doing bulk data collection. Just 2 or 3 weeks ago, the Treasury Department sent out a notice to financial institutions in 30 different zip codes in California and Texas and said, you have to report on any transaction larger than $200. The way the system works today is there's an automatic, you have to automatically report transactions over $10,000. This reduced that to $200, right? So the existing system is highly surveilled, it's highly programmable, and that's before we get stable coins or CBDCs. So we absolutely need the ability to have ubiquitous and cheap transactions. It's key to stopping absolute digital tyranny. Whereas, he tries to claim he's an Austrian. His book has some Austrian economics in it, but he misses the fundamental point. Murray Rothbard talks about this. Many textbooks say money has several functions: a medium of exchange, unit of account, or a measure of values, a store of value, et cetera. But it should be clear that all of those functions are simply corollaries of the one great function, the medium of exchange. And so somehow, again, people read these books, they read the Bitcoin Standard, they read this stuff, they see these memes, they don't think about them critically. They don't understand whether it even makes any sense. It's just, well, I read this in a book, this book is popular, this is now my belief system. And it's been effective. The Bitcoin Standard is part of how Michael Saylor switched from being a Bitcoin skeptic to whatever you want to call him now, chief grifter, borrowing other people's money to buy the coin. Bitcoin was also always supposed to have big blocks. Again, there's all kinds of documentation on this, and above and beyond all else, I encourage you to buy the book and read the book. I'm just giving you kind of the Cliff Notes version and trying to get this information out there, since Roger can't, but in the way where maybe we can start explaining the basics to people that are newly onboarded, who think that somehow if they just keep investing and they cut their own hair and dollar cost average and put all their money in, then at some point in the future they're going to be at the top of the pyramid of society, living in a citadel, and everybody else is going to be basically serfs underneath it. This is actually part of the meme and the culture of all of this, and so it's not going to work that way. I mean, it's basically been pushed to surveillance Ponzi territory, and people need to understand that we have a real big problem looming with digital tyranny. So it was always supposed to have big blocks. Again, Satoshi Nakamoto said it can be phased in like this: if block number is greater than this, then max block size equals larger limit. So again, changing the block size is something that you can do by literally just changing one variable in the code, and there was never even supposed to be a block size to begin with. Gavin Andreessen, so Satoshi Nakamoto handed over basically the keys to the GitHub for Bitcoin to a guy named Gavin Andreessen, and he was always an advocate of big blocks. So a quote from him: "The plan from the beginning was to support huge blocks. The 1 megabyte hard limit was always a temporary denial of service prevention measure." Mike Hearn, who's also was an early, I think one of the first 5 developers. "Bitcoin was built for massive scale and did not run into inherent technological limitations. Instead, the project was taken over by a small group of software developers who redesigned the whole system." And then lastly, the CEO of BitPay, which is one of, if not the largest point of sale vendor for crypto, he said, "If you told me in 2011 that we would be sitting here in 2017 and we hadn't bumped up this block size, I would have said there's no way that could happen." So again, all the OGs, everybody was involved. The early core developers and everything else were just kind of befuddled by this idea that this 1 megabyte limit that was put in as a temporary denial of service measure was going to become the absolute limit, and that the whole narrative was going to shift to digital gold, and then we'll build things on other layers. It's mind-boggling. And so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. There's a lot of text here too, but the whole point of the nodes, this idea that, somehow you're empowered because you're using an outdated, slow $50 Raspberry Pi, and that makes you participating in the network. I mean, it's kind of like it's the participation prize of participating in this network. It was always intended, and the quote from Satoshi Nakamoto, eventually when we have client-only implementations, the blockchain size won't matter much. Network nodes would consolidate, and there would be more pooled mining and GPU farms, and users would run client only. So again, you as the end user wouldn't need to be running a node. You wouldn't have expensive equipment or whatever. This would be something that you would have people, large institutions, competing over mining and basically solving these math puzzles. It was always from the design. And so one big part of it is, again, so technocracy is all about artificial scarcity. The whole idea that I talk about all the time with technocracy is to have a one world global government and one global digital currency that is backed by energy credits. And the energy credits are in essence that's false scarcity. That's saying, well, carbon is the only, and we're only going to measure things by carbon. It means you're going to limit actually even the exploration for other types of it artificially limits things. But what we now know the technocrats are doing is they're going up and buying up forests, and they're front running this so that they basically can have a control over the new artificial scarcity. But the idea that BTC, that big blocks are unworkable and not decentralized, again, you really have to be a Luddite and take a very pessimistic view. Satoshi even talked about how the technology in 2008 and 2009, he predicted that it would continue to grow based on Moore's law, and that's happened, and in some cases beyond. So download speeds have absolutely, bandwidth costs have absolutely plummeted. It was $10 per megabit per month in 2009. That's dropped to less than 50%, continues to drop. The average download speed was 4 megabytes per second in 2009. Now it's greater than 180. And somebody's actually working, some scientists have just hit 301 terabytes per second over existing fiber networks. And so this idea that we're supposed to keep this thing hobbled because it's unsafe because of bandwidth and these other things just doesn't match. And so it was Safi who actually made this comment. A node that can add 42 terabytes of data every year would require a very expensive computer. The network bandwidth required to process all of these transactions every day would be an enormous cost that would be clearly unworkable, complicated, and expensive for a distributed network to maintain. Absolutely 100% false based on all of the data about storage cost, bandwidth, and everything else. So again, the technocrats have come in and they've hijacked Bitcoin. I mean, there's a great quote from Hayek: "The curious task of economics is to demonstrate to men how little they really know about about what they imagine they can design." And so the central planners at Bitcoin have created, again, their own artificial economy where they've capped the block size. They've pushed the financial transactions off-chain into these second layers and things like Lightning Network. They've encouraged nodes for all, and then they've created an artificial fee market. I actually view the Bitcoin core, the people that hijack Bitcoin, as the same in terms of ideology and how they function as the technocrats and Klaus Schwab and all of these other people that we view as being the enemy from a central bank digital currency perspective. Well, they're the same. It's the same mindset that has hijacked Bitcoin. So there are 4 eras of Bitcoin that there may even be time to add a fifth. But the first era, and that's kind of when I got involved, and that's where Roger certainly got involved in 2010. The culture was techies and libertarians. I mean, the hierarchy was you had Satoshi Nakamoto, who was this anonymous developer. Nobody knows who he is. There was no industry development, and there was no public awareness. And so now you focus to where we are right now, and we went through these various stages, which I'll talk about not today. This is actually just part 1 of hijacking Bitcoin, but now where it is, I mean, this book was published in I think April the 12th or something last year. So much is, think about how much has changed just since this book was published. So now the culture is, well, it's price focused, but now with an emphasis on lobbyists and people pushing government officials to use a combination of taxpayer theft directly and civil asset forfeiture to drive up the price. Like it's price focused is an understatement, right? It's price focused, but now kind of moving on like to extortion. The leadership hierarchy is very much still Bitcoin core. The industry development is mainstream, I guess, to a point, although mainstream, I guess, in the sense of what in industry to do what, because Bitcoin doesn't actually do anything right now. And public awareness is definitely now mainstream. Mainstream and completely devoid from truthful information about the nature of Bitcoin. Again, because as I say, I encounter people all the time, and I will tell you, I mean, I mentioned this yesterday, this conference I was at in New York, and it was half the people are like, oh, Bitcoin is digital gold, and we're buying. Although there was actually skepticism about it, but that was their understanding of what Bitcoin is. And then on the other hand, there are people that think that XRP and Stellar are part of the quantum financial system, and there's going to be a complete debt jubilee and reset. And so my point is that overall, now the mainstream is completely uninformed, and it's almost like a combination of Q-level propaganda meets actual direct government propaganda. There's really not much truth or factual information involved at this point. I'm going to spend a little time talking about Lightning Network, but not a lot. Normally I would. I mean, a year ago, I was like trying to explain to people why it was conceptually flawed and everything and wouldn't work. I don't need to do that anymore because even people in Bitcoin concede that. People are not using Lightning Network. Lightning Network, the idea behind Lightning Network was you're not going to do transactions on the base layer. There's going to be this thing called Lightning Network where you basically move your Bitcoin, some of your Bitcoin to this Lightning Network, and then you can transact there. And none of those transactions are done on the blockchain. So this was the scaling solution that people came up with and promised people and said, whenever this was, 2015. It's been like 8 years or something. And the rumor is always it's 18 months away from being finished. And so we're 8 years in and it's still not finished. It still doesn't work. Nobody is using it. And I'll talk about a couple of reasons that it was flawed. But the thing is, the argument has actually moved away from, well, okay, Bitcoin will become a medium of exchange. At some point, we just have to fix Lightning. People now don't even talk about there being a medium of exchange component to Bitcoin. They have solidified, they have ossified, as Michael Saylor says, around this idea of it's only a store of value. So we don't even need to fight with people about Lightning Network. They concede that Bitcoin isn't going to be this. And in a weird twist of fate, some of these same people that are promoting the hijacked digital gold version support stable coins, which are digital programmable fiat. Again, we started with peer-to-peer digital cash, where you use this new money that's censorship resistant outside of third parties and banks. And now we're like, okay, well, we're going to have this hobbled technocratic thing that people invest in, and we're going to try to influence politicians to use taxpayer money. And then we're going to use for day-to-day payments surveillance fiat in the form of stable coins. Like it's 180 degrees away from the white paper. The problem with Lightning Network is based on, again, the whole point of this was, well, we have to keep the block small. Well, if you keep the block small, then, to access Lightning Network, you actually have to make a transaction on the chain to access the second layer. Well, based on the 1 megabyte block size, it would take 120 years to onboard people to the Lightning Network. And furthermore, you have to generally open two channels a year. I'm not going to go into all of the details on that, but to let 7 people actually access this, if you wanted to have everybody on board and using Lightning Network, you would have to have a minimum of 133 megabyte blocks. So again, by design, there is no way Lightning Network could have ever worked as a solution for peer-to-peer cash on the second layer. The other thing is, because of the way that it works, and I won't go into a lot of it, but other than to say, let's say I wanted to send, $10 to Bob, but I'm not directly connected to Bob, so I have to go through Alice. Well, if Alice doesn't have $10, then I actually can't go through her. And so what that means is, the way this ends up getting set up is, in order for people to be able to use the Lightning Network, you need to have these big hubs that have enough liquidity, or otherwise people can't connect through other nodes to get to the party that they want to get to. Well, once you have these big nodes that are centralized, then that's a big source of potential censorship. That's a source of being banned. And then what's practically happened, because this isn't a theoretical concern, it's actually played out. You had big hubs, like Exodus Wallet served as a hub. A lot of people served as hubs. And because of anti-money laundering and know your customer laws, they shut down. They were threatened and they shut down. So now you can't. So Lightning is unusable because you need to have hubs in order for it to be useful, which defeats the purpose of having it to begin with. And people don't want to serve as hubs because it's a legal liability. So Lightning is a disaster. I think at this point, most people concede it's a disaster. So I won't spend more time on it unless it becomes a thing where people are starting to talk again about how Lightning is going to be the solution. But I will tell you, I haven't heard that lately. I've seen more rage quitting. I've seen more people kind of exiting Lightning.